Shalom lekulam. I was asked to begin, so with your permission. I'm sure that you are all overwhelmed by the three first presentations, and we will keep it that way at least. And I'm very glad to introduce the next three speakers who managed skillfully to accommodate the practice and the theory of translation, which is a main concern for the Aguda, the Chevra, we represent today. So we will start with Shaul Levin. Shaul Levin is writing his PhD in Tel Aviv University under the supervision of Professor Nitza Ben-Ari, who will conclude this day. His dissertation is on the integrative process of cultural transfer, importing the model of the theater of the absurd from France and its spread in Israeli culture. Special emphasis in this thesis is given to the division of labor carried out between translation and other channels of transfer in this process. Shaul Levin teaches at the Tel Aviv University, and he has translated, among others, Philip Roth, Christoph Isherwood, and Jack Kerouac. And he also, as far as I know, has written a few poems. He's writing poetry from time to time. So we welcome Shaul Levin.
Hello, everyone. My paper is titled Preliminary Outline for General Theory. Can you hear me now? Okay. This will be difficult to stand like this. A preliminary outline for a general theory of transfer. As you have heard, my dissertation, my PhD dissertation, deals with transfer, and my interest in transfer starts with translation, but okay, I said my dissertation deals with transfer. The interest starts from translation, but spreads out a little wider than translation. And this is basically what I will be talking about here. I want to start with presenting the notion of transfer as it is found in DTS, in Descriptive Translation Studies, very briefly, then go on to offer a definition of transfer, a semiotic, functionalistic definition of transfer, but will not go too deep into the theoretical part of this. And then later on, very importantly so, present some notions of transfer or direct attention to some notions of transfer found in different disciplines in the social sciences and the humanities, which I think are very important for us to turn to in our dealing with transfer. I want to start with Evan Zohar's very famous, I think, and very much quoted Call for Transfer Theory of 1981, in which he wrote, "The procedures by which textual models in one system are transferred to another constitute a major feature of systems. This has been, at least generally, formulated before, notably by Jacobson, but no consequences were ever drawn for translation theory. Can we stick to this practice, or would it be wiser to acknowledge the implicit practice whereby translation is discussed in terms of transfer and vice versa? In other words, would it be profitable to establish a transfer theory?" Now, in another paper I presented somewhere else, I have claimed that for mostly almost 35 years now, this idea has almost not been taken up by any other scholars to actually work towards a general theory of transfer. There have been several attempts, and some of them I may mention along the way today as well, but this is mainly the direction in which I would like to go. If we try to talk about translation and transfer in descriptive translation studies very briefly, we could mention several scholars that have been doing work on this, most notably Anthony Pym, which says that transfer sets up situation in which translation might be required, therefore making translation one of several possible responses to transfer. This is important because he places transfer as a prerequisite of translation, which means both logically and chronologically it precedes translation. Evan Zohar himself, in a later work of 1997, has something quite similar. And to get to the very latest of this, we could quote Levin, Belgian scholar, who has tried to put to use a term of assumed transfer, based, of course, on Gidon Turi's famous assumed translation, as an umbrella concept encompassing features of cultural exchange processes, of which, again, explicitly labeled translation is only one, which means we are dealing with a wider array of phenomena in which translation is only one. This is one side of what translation studies has done with dealing with transfer. If we remember Evan Zohar's call for transfer theory that talking about translation in terms of transfer and vice versa, then we can see a clear division between at least several scholars. We can bring Pym again, in which, as we said, transfer precedes translation chronologically, logically, and causally, and that Delstut shows translation to be one possible option within a wider category of transfer. But we can also quote Rachel Weisbrod, which is here with us today, from one of her articles in 2004, or Susan Gopferich, who have really tried to go the other way around, to treat non-translational transfer as translation, and therefore calling for the application of translation studies procedure for the analysis of procedures that are usually not considered as transfer, such as adaptations and I think Susan Gopferich talks about localization as well and other such phenomena. Wait, let's stay with this for one more minute. I would like to claim that if we try to look at transfer and translation in this way, in which they could be treated one in the terms of the other, or vice versa, the way Evan Zohar called for, then there is a clear distinction between these two options. The second one, the one that I present here through the articles of Weisbrod and Gopferich, but even if I don't only use these two, that treats non-translation transfer as translation phenomena, may have clearly very interesting advantages for treating these specific procedures. But in terms of the larger call for transfer theory, I think it is the wrong path to take, since it really loses the idea that we are looking for the specificity of translation in translation, and we would like to treat translation as part of something bigger in terms of transfer studies. The main reason for me to look for a wider array is that we are not alone. As we have heard in the former lecture, gender studies may be one example of this, but there are many, many other disciplines doing things connected with the transfer, with theories, very elaborate theories that deal with this, that we have no idea, we in terms of translation studies scholar have no idea about, and it goes the same way vice versa. Translation studies is doing things with transfer in which these disciplines and scholars have no idea about, and I think it is about time that we start a greater dialogue in order to attain greater achievements for this. Now, what am I talking about when I'm talking about walking towards a general theory of transfer? First of all, as I've said, I would rather see translation as a form of transfer and not the other way around. And to quote again Evan Zohar from the same 1981 call, translation theory would be more adequate if it were to become part of general transfer theory to which it will contribute. The main reason, as I've said before, is that the pool of transfer processes and conceptualizations is greater than that which translation studies delineate. And here I could quote again Levin-Delst and Anthony Pym. Levin-Delst said a cultural transfer is a popular concept in the humanities and enumerates anthropology, psychology, sociology, and so forth as disciplines in which it is put to use. Anthony Pym mentions, in addition, psychoanalysis, computer science, law, commerce, etc. And to these I would add at least management, organization, communication, and media studies. These are all disciplines in which transfer and various forms of transfer, in whatever terms, is being dealt with and conceptualized in a very, very deep way and theoretical way, and I think it is important. Therefore, I would like to see translation studies as a contributor to transfer theory, but not as the single source for its development, which is the way really Evan Zohar called for, translation studies as something from which transfer studies would be developed. And probably the last point here is that I think the establishment of a theory of transfer should be a very interdisciplinary endeavor, and this is of course based on everything that I've been saying up till now. If we take the functionalistic systemic point of view, which is the point of view of polysystem theory in which descriptive translation studies is placed, about transfer, then we could say that transfer is a procedure of movement occurring between systems in contact. Again, we could quote Pym and Dels. I will leave this to you to read. What is most important is that transfer involves modification, both of the transferred item or model and of the receiving system. And here we could really talk about the three postulates of functionalistic structuralism, in which a transferred item never retains its original function, an item's function is a systemic feature, and modification of function always entails a modification of the system as well. Coming up from this, I would like to offer a definition of transfer that is specifically functionalistic and semiotic, but this does not mean it only pertains to polysystem studies and this is, or to polysystem theory, and this is what I would like to get to later on. So I would like to say that transfer is the flow of items, either models or practices, between cultural systems, entailing a modification in the semiotic functional level of both transferred items and the system absorbing it. Now, this is not so distinct from other definitions you may find in literature, except that it puts emphasis very specifically on the semiotic functional level at which the change is being, the modification is being made. And this is made in order to avoid cases in which debates like between Evan Zohar and Rakefet Selashefi can go on about whether importing a car or shirts from Hong Kong to the States, the actual item is considered as a form of transfer, or transfer entails something more than this. Importation of goods is completely excluded from this because we are only talking about the semiotic functional level. It also has further advantages. There is no a priori postulation of the level of the system in which this takes place, which is, if anybody who is acquainted with Evan Zohar's interference theory knows it is there. There's no a priori postulation of the nature of modification. There is no talk anymore about negative transfer or positive transfer, systemic need for items provided from the outside, etc., etc. This is all made for I would say, a more neutral theoretic handling of the notion of transfer. Now, I want to concentrate a little on modification, and here really go first to start and see what other disciplines are doing with this, because the former definition in which the movement of items entails a modification of the item and of the system is of course present in all other disciplines that I've mentioned, or that I have alluded to in the humanities, in the social sciences. And I want to see a little what this is called or how this is dealt with in these disciplines. So if we go to the humanities, and we're talking here specifically about history, political studies, cultural studies, etc., we can see the talks about the transformative process of reduction and reinterpretation. This is Matthias Midel, a German historian. Transformation, transculturation are terms that we may find in cultural exchange theories and Histoire croisée, which is a French historian or French history theory made by Werner and Zimmermann. Transfer is always a kind of innovation, adaptation, translation, appropriation to new environment, etc. These are all terms used in these fields. I think what may be even more interesting is what is being done in the social sciences in this regard, and here we are mostly in the realms of what is called the diffusion of innovations theory, which is a very put into a very wide use in the social sciences. And here it could be interesting to read several quotes. Lil Rank is a sociologist quoted here, portrays the interpretive process as one of translating concrete practices into abstractions for export and then unpacking the abstraction into a suitably modified concrete practice upon arrival. Practices do not flow, theorized models and careful framings do. This sounds very Evan Zohar. You can read the exact same things written in Evan Zohar without any relation between the two. And I don't know what this is not seen so well here. The second is the technician here. The end of the second quote is missing. Few practices in any come of any diffusion process is unchanged. Of course, again, this is the same situations where new ideas and practices are adapted to local context as they travel. During the diffusion have variously been referred to, and now you have, again, all the terms: reorientation, variation, corruption, alteration, optimization. You can keep on doing this. This comes from a very interesting article, and there are several articles like this, by Ansari, Fis, and Zajak. These are management, organization, strategy scholars, or studies scholars. And in a very interesting article called Made to Fit, how practices vary as they move, or as they flow, I don't remember, as they diffuse, I think, probably. So having seen this, we'll manage, I hope. Having said this about modification and seeing what may be done in other places, and this is really only the tip of the iceberg, I would like to talk about what is lacking, in my opinion, in descriptive translation studies or polysystem theory in the conceptualization of transfer, why I think we should go to look for solutions or at least turn to other disciplines for this. The first is that polysystem theory, mainly Evan Zohr's development of this, but also Gidon Turi's, I guess, makes an arbitrary dissection of transfer phenomena, making a very clear distinction between intercultural or intersystemic transfer and intrasystemic transfer, and really treating this differently in terms of the theory. And I think the conceptualization of transfer processes must take into account the continuous nature of the process and treat all segments in a theoretical, neutral way. There is no need to make any distinction between the two levels of the system. Transfer processes do not occur in pure functionalistic space, of course. They occur in the real world, where agents and institutions contribute to the various systems and operating in them. Therefore, the conceptualization of transfer processes must take into account the sociological aspect of the realization. Of course, I will not be the first one to say that the sociological term of translation studies is, of course, not new. I've not invented this, but really integrating these agents and institutions into the theory in a very informed way, I think, is important. And third, transfer is not a momentary occurrence, but a process taking place over time. And I do need the rest of this. Just like okay. Until this is taken care of. If transfer processes take place over time, then the time itself, the nature of time and its influence on the process have to be brought into account as well. This is what I call the temporal or the historical aspect of transfer processes. Let's concentrate a little bit on transfer processes or continuous in principle. I guess this is most of what I will be able to do in this time frame. I perceive transfer as an ongoing cultural process which may extend in principle for as long as an item or model or practice, it doesn't matter which term you use, continues to be appropriated from one system or subsystem to the next. And therefore, theoretically, transfer processes should be treated as a seamless continuum, regardless of the nature of the systems between which they occur. And we could think here, say, of a theatrical model. This is what I'm dealing with in my dissertation, that starts as being French avant-garde and then migrates to French mainstream, British mainstream, Israeli avant-garde, to Israeli what I call quasi-mainstream, then to mainstream and back to the avant-garde with all sorts of parallel feeds and looping back in this. This would be one way to describe what happens with the theater of the absurd that starts with in the late 40s in France, not with Anatole Godot, this is just a picture, but really you can trace this through French avant-garde to mainstream and then moving to other places such as London as well before it comes to Israel. And then you may find in 2004, 10 years ago, a short theater festival held in Tel Aviv, the Tzavta Short Play Festival, in which out of 10 plays, 6 are described by critics as being absurdist plays. And if you look for the trajectories linking absurdist theater in France in the early 50s and trying to get to the 2000s in Israel, you may finally look at something like this if you try to follow the trajectories. So this is one way in which the continuous nature of transfer processes may be viewed. Another way is different. Another way is the form taken by Levendelst, for instance. Transfer is a continuous process. A transferred product may itself give way to another product using a different carrier, then back again. For example, the transfer from a book to a movie or vice versa, then to a cartoon, to a game, what in many cases would be called adaptation, but I think this is a narrow or a too narrow term for this. And here we may see, I would like to show you just a very short snippet from a film, or from that may give an illustration of this.
Of the 10 highest grossing films per year from the last 10 years, 74 out of 100 are either sequels or remakes of earlier films or adaptations of comic books, video games, books, and so on. Transforming the old into the new is Hollywood's greatest talent. We've got 3 sequels to a film adapted from a theme park attraction. We've got a movie musical based on a musical which was based on a movie. We've got 2 sequels to a film that was adapted from an animated TV show based on a line of toys. We've got a movie based on 2 books, one of which was based on a blog, which was inspired by the other book that was adapted into the film. You follow?
This is taken from a very interesting short series of videos made by a filmmaker called Kirby Ferguson. You can find it on the web. It is free for all. It is called Everything is a Remix. It is very, very interesting to watch. And Kirby Ferguson is a filmmaker. He has nothing to do with transfer theories or with translation studies, but it is really a way of saying it is all found out there. It is, everyone is dealing with this in one way or another. Very briefly, within the same principle of continuous nature of transfer processes, this is of course compatible with very basic tenets of structuralism. I could quote here František Daneš and the center-periphery transition postulate, and I guess I will not have time to go into this now. More importantly, we may see here again what other disciplines are doing with this, the form of treating transfer as a continuous process in principle. So we may find, this is again from the humanities, this is English studies in Germany, I think professor of English studies in Germany, Christian Eisenberg, saying that cultural transfers have to be described as historical processes. Such processes can change in quality and direction, run continuously or discontinuously, accelerate and abruptly, gradually die or last forever. Again, from Histoire Croisée, we have transfer processes are not only linear or successive movements, may be multi-directional, they may follow each other in temporal sequence, retransfer or overlap partially or wholly, etc., etc. A very interesting account taken from a scholar, a Dutch scholar working within the realm of diffusion of innovation theories, but in social movement and activism research. And she says networks are both the products and the central locus of diffusion. Ideas and practices spread through movement networks. Diffusion also generates new networks. Adapters may become examples for other members of their networks or new adherents. Ideas may continue to circulate in this growing network. Adjustments and reinventions may also become new objects of diffusion, etc., etc. I can read the rest. I have highlighted in red the terms used here. This is really, in this form, such a short presentation, only meant to give you an idea of the amount of work that is being done outside of translation studies in conceptualization of transfer. I think to a much greater extent than Evan Zoll has ever thought is possible or envisioned, and definitely to a larger extent than most translation studies scholars are aware of today. This is beginning to change just a little. I know Levendelst is looking more into other disciplines as well, but it is very, very new. I would briefly mention just before concluding, the 2 other principles I mentioned. Each would need a very long, a much longer presentation than this to develop, but the first one was that transfer processes are continuous in principle. The second would be a sociological principle of cultural transfer, and once we allow ourselves to leave translation studies, or descriptive translation studies, then we may add or integrate into our definitions notions and terms coming from other theories as well. So this items spread in the megasystem of culture through ongoing operations of transfer along sociologically governed trajectories. And then we may say that each spreading from one system to the next consists of two distinct phases, and talk about an importation phase and a reception phase, defined now not only in Bourdieu's terms or not only in polysystem theory terms, but in terms also taken from theory of diffusion of innovation terms and from other historical theories that are being developed mostly in the realm of French-German relationship, because this is really where most of this work is being carried out. The third principle would be the temporal or historical principle of cultural transfer, both the nature of modification of the transferred item that the transfer item undergoes and the nature of its reception in the system have something to do with the time factor of the process. Here we could see, again, interesting examples for this taken from these disciplines in the humanities and the social sciences. Time is an explanatory variable for reinvention, says Hayes, a scholar working in law research. Practices become increasingly adapted and customized during the diffusion process. This could be taken from Evan Zohar as well, but this is not. This is David Strunk. This is, again, business management studies. Time is of central importance to the process since it affects what is being received. While the diffusion of item transforms through traveling, later observers come across a different example than earlier observers, and we could go on with this. This is, again, Ansari Fis and Zajac, taken from business and management studies. And we could go on with examples here, but I think it suffices to say that there is much work being done there. And therefore, when I'd like to conclude this, my claim would be that if we take a different approach to transfer and not look at this only as a product of translation or translation studies being only enlarged into transfer in a way that really treats transfer just as a wider form of translation. I don't think this is the right way to go about this. We could talk about a definition of transfer that is, as I have presented before, an ongoing process in this semiotic, functionalistic, basic view of culture that is found in polysystem studies. Talking about these three principles I've mentioned: continuous nature, the sociological nature, and the temporal principle of cultural transfer. And if I go back to the very beginning and to Evan Zoll's question, would it be profitable to establish a theory, a general theory of transfer? I think the answer is certainly yes. And if we ask what would translation studies have to do in this, then I think translation studies can play a leading role in establishing this general theory of transfer, but it has to be done while keeping open eyes to what is being done and happening in other disciplines in the social sciences and the humanities as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments? I guess we have time for two.
First, I'm a little surprised that you don't start the discussion of the very word translation in English or in any other languages, because what it means is transfer. If you go to any dictionary, you find that the classical dictionary definitions that say translation is a transfer of meaning. Summarizing. In Hebrew, the word used is hataka. Natik milashon milashon, and so on. If you look at tirgum, the verb tafish gumen, this is what you find. If you go to hataka, you find tirgum as an example of it. That's quite interesting. So that's one thing. But now the classical logic of the notion of transfer or translation is that there is something which is being translated in an Aristotelian logic, or to go further, in a Platonic ontology. There is something stable there that is transferred from one place to another, and perhaps it may undergo some modification. But what was difficult for me to follow in the way you conceptualize the methodology here is how do you go about defining what is the item that's being transferred? What is the entity that is being transferred? Now, of course, all the translation theories like Hidoturi and so on have shown that you cannot establish a theory of adequation between the source text and the outcome text. true. Still, intuitively, when you translate Philip Roth, it is assumed that what you will produce as a Hebrew translation of it will be somehow comparable and would at least partake of the same essence as what you were faced with when you began. So what was missing from me here? You see, like you were walking around this old, hoary, boring ontological question of what is that thing which we can then come and say that we are transferring when we are operating a translation or an adaptation or whatever other mode of transfer you will use.
But first of all, it is true. I did not go into this. I think it has been so how to call this, used and abused in so many ways. But you would find very different notions, and this you probably know, of how to approach this question, even within translation studies. And Anthony Pym would do completely different things with this than other scholars, treating the movement of the actual material text where nobody else is even considering this as something that is important to deal with. You deal with the text, you deal with the sentences, you deal with the meaning, you deal with so many other things in this, and Walter Benjamin would be doing a completely different thing when he talks in a philosophical sense about what is actually being transferred. So I think it is probably not, for me, this is not the starting point for this discussion, because the question is not what actually in an ontological sense gets transferred, but really more interestingly how it is transferred and what happens when it moves from one place to another. And this could be on all levels of movement. It could be on the level of the text, it can be on the material level, it can be on the level of the meaning, it can be on the level of relationships between into whatever slot it goes into in the new culture. It is true. I circumnavigated this, but I don't think this is the right starting point, at least for the discussion of transfer in this form.
Yeah, I totally agree. Sorry, for one simple reason, because I think we are amidst the discussion of having to argue why we still exist as a discipline of translation studies, because translation today is researched on by everybody. And you said it already, you quoted Pym. I think Pym is perhaps not the most radical person who is talking about a very open translation concept. There are many others. Just think about cultural translation. I mean, cultural translation is something which has been used in so many different disciplines. And it is something which is abused, of course, I agree. But the people who discuss cultural translation and who adopt it as an analytical tool do not even take into account that there exists a discipline of translation studies. So this means that I think we are in a this is why in part I agree with my fourth speaker, because I think before we enter a discussion on where translation has to be positioned, for example, inside a transfer theory, we should really get more involved in what we understand in our discipline as translation. Because my question is, where are the boundaries? What is a translation? What is not a translation? We cannot find one discussion for it, and we shouldn't, of course. But we cannot ignore what is going on outside our discipline. And this is why, now I come to my question. When I read your abstract, my first thought was, well, why do you call it transfer theory? Why don't you call it translation theory? Because transfer and translation, as you said, is very often used in a synonymous way. But then when your presentation, and I like your presentation very much, you showed in a very sophisticated way that transfer has become a very, let's say, a very differentiated concept over the last 10 or 15 years. So translation can be part of it. But I just wonder where you see the relation between translation and transfer. Where do you see translation located, or translation theory located within transfer theory? I agree with you that there has to be, or can be, a broader theory which can encompass various, like cultural transfer of Zimmermann and Werner and all this kind of stuff. But where do you see the reference, the relationship between translation or translation theory and transfer theory? What is the surplus value, let's say, for translation studies to know more and to elaborate on the transfer?
Yeah, then I will try to answer this, but first I would like to say that I do not share the fear for the future of translation studies as a discipline. I think if you go back even to this very first call of Itamar Ravenzor in 1981, you will read very specifically there he already mentions this fear of if we develop into a wider transfer theory or theory of transfer, what will happen to translation studies? And I do not share the fear, and this is 35 years ago, 33, because really it was written in 79 already. So it is 35 years ago. I do not share this fear. I think there is much more to be gained without losing the specificity of translation studies if we do actually open ourselves up to what's happening outside of translation studies in these fields that may help us in conceptualizing translation, because this is the main point, and this is coming to your question. And here you could also go back to reading Pym as well. In 1992, his famous translation as text transfer, material text transfer. In order to know more or to analyze more what are the specificities of translation as one form of one possible form of transfer, it may be important, it may be helpful to know more about other forms of transfer, because then you may find the differences. Then you may look for what makes translation a translation and not just another sort of procedure. And I do not think probably you could do this without leaving the boundaries of translation studies, but I think this is what translation studies have been doing for the past 40 years. And I'm now calling for doing something which is a little different, because I think there's much to be gained from this. This does not necessarily have to mean the end of translation studies as a separate discipline. It is not. I think the other way around is much more dangerous in this relation. Calling for the treatment of all other transfer procedures as if they were translation, I think brings into translation many phenomena that are not really or may not necessarily have to be viewed as specifically translation phenomenon. And therefore, we include in translation studies things that are a little different. But I don't see the danger for translation studies as a discipline in this at all. I only see what may be gained by this.
Go out of the translation studies field, and then you see that we are in a big danger.
Then it is our task, I guess, to do something about it.
Yes, that's
yeah?
right.
Okay. So with this challenging disagreement, we'll have to proceed. I'm sorry. That's a big question.